Today, I'm extremely pleased and honored to have as my guest Robert Crumb, the pioneering artist and cartoonist. Robert is so well known that he really doesn't need any other introduction, but for more details about his biographical background, please see the link from this show at EP to his website. And I would add that I've been a huge fan of his since I was a teenager. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, George.
Well, first of all, I guess I should say that it's your birthday to the end of the month, and you're 65th, so happy birthday.
I'll be 65. I'm going to retire.
Please don't retire.
Yeah, I've put enough ink under the bridge. I'm going to get out of the way and let the younger ones have their say.
Well, I hope not. I certainly hope not. The only book of yours that I've got on my library shelves at the moment is the Crumb Handbook.
Yeah, it's fairly comprehensive.
I got it as soon as it first came out. I've got some other books of yours, but I can't find them at the moment. I don't know what happened to them, but
buried under decades of more recent material, probably.
It's something. Books have a way of doing that.
Can you believe, like, Zap Comics first came out 40 years ago, 1968?
Well, you see, I was sort of a precocious teenager, so even though I'm younger than you by about 15 years or so, I was following all this stuff and running around and getting into trouble, and so I was marginally aware of your work very early.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I think it would have been 72, but I went to so many different ones that I'm not sure what the proper count is.
I graduated in 61, so yeah. Like more than 10 years older than you, probably.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about the handbook. It comes with the CD with some of your recordings.
Right.
And I was listening to this last night as I was looking at some of your cartoons. And I wondered, was that your intention in part to have people listen to your music while they?
No, not at all. It was completely two different things. Except that I was obligated to do the art for the album covers and all that, but otherwise the music was a completely separate interest. And for me, it was more or less a hobby. I was not a serious professional musician. I never pretended to be, but these guys that I was playing with, they wanted to get paying gigs, and they didn't have other ways of making their money. Mostly they were pretty much a bunch of bums. So I agreed to play professionally with them, and then we got this recording deal with this small company. And but then let's see, some of that stuff on that CD is also later stuff that I did, sort of, but not actually from record albums. It's from some of them are from a radio show that broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of them are, I think there's even one or two with my daughter that we played somewhere in Germany that somebody recorded in 2003.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I was wondering because one sort of historian of culture, Richard Attenborough, when he looks at the early cave drawings, and I suppose that's a form of cartoons.
I think those guys were very serious. They were not entertaining anybody with those drawings.
But Attenborough says that he speculates that those pictures weren't meant to be seen the way we would go and walk around in a museum and just look at them silently, but that they were part of a celebration, probably, which
God only knows.
Storytelling, music, son et lumière, all that. So that's why I thought that maybe there was a deliberate connection between your recording and the art.
Well, I don't know, the kind of music I like and the cartoons and all, it's all kind of part of some kind of old-time proletarian culture, low cultural forms, playing that string band music and old-time country music and all that, and drawing comic books and cartoons. Kind of, I don't know, it all fits together in some way.
Well, there was one of the recordings that particularly got to me, and that was the My Girl's Pussy song.
There's one pet I'd like to pet. Every evening we get set. I stroke it every I forget the words.
Well, back when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, there was sort of a madrigals thing, and then one evening I went to a performance. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it was sort of a bawdy madrigals evening. So you have all these people; they're all dressed up in tuxedos and evening gowns, and they've got a harp and flutes and I don't know, tambourine, whatever. So they're scrubbed and they're glowing, and you have an audience with people in suits and ties, and they're singing away, with great gusto about how you fucked the farmer's daughter.
In English?
It was either old English or it was enough in English that you knew exactly what they were saying, and it was
politely disguised enough so that it did not offend the dignitaries present or the old people.
No, and that was the point. And it's so rare to have a performance like that, and yet that's a cultural tradition that is connected to high art in a way, but it's an authentic tradition, right?
Yes, I suppose so, but I don't know. That's not something that's often done publicly in polite society. In My Girl's Pussy, we got that from an old 1931 English record. I think that the word pussy in its connotation as female genitalia in those days in England probably was not widespread enough to offend, because it was a standardly issued record. It was, a commercially issued record, not one of those underground party records or anything. So, and it's quite well performed, the original. I stroke it every chance I get. It's My Girl. But we put that on this record, and the guy, the company that put them out, that got copies sent back to him with people scrawled on the record itself words like "shame on you." People were surprised and offended by it. Interesting. Didn't sell very well, actually.
Well, but to me, I don't know. It seems like that's a pretty integral part of this old music and connection to eternity that you talk about.
Absolutely. Also, that when My Girl's Pussy came out, it was the 70s, and it was the feminist era. So it was really the wrong time to be putting out such songs. But anyway, yeah.
Well, okay. Let's detour.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you like old-time music generally? Do you listen to old music? That style of old music at all?
I should. I'm sort of halfway there. I kind of hate modern music, and I never listen to music, but I do like the music.
You never listen to music?
Almost never.
Oh, what a pity, because, there's such a gold mine of old music that was recorded in the 78 era, the 20s and 30s, of country music and blues and jazz, and then all the ethnic stuff that, I'm a big proselytizer about that music. I have a big collection of it. It's fabulous. It's the real thing. It's the real authentic music, and a lot of people, they don't know about it because it's really hard to find nowadays. To dig around for the CD reissues and stuff, But it's out there. You can find it. If you look on the internet. Then if you don't know the names or anything, if you don't know who Blind Blake is or Chubby Parker is or Emery Arthur is, then it's really hard to find.
In the early days of music file sharing, I collected some of that stuff, and then I lost the disc that the hard drive that had it, and then of course file sharing became so legally treacherous that.
All right. Music is such an important part of my life. I can't imagine. Sometimes I feel music deprived if I'm out in the world for a while, and all I'm subjected to is horrible modern commercial pop music, in public places.
Yeah.
I feel I start getting a yearning to hear authentic, real music, and I have to, when I come home, the first thing I have to do is listen to some of it just to clear away the bad feelings I got from the horrible modern pop music, which, after listening to old music, that modern stuff just sounds so fake and contrived, and just sounds smarmy, and don't want it to touch you.
Well, I agree. Modern music is just crap.
But to make a blanket statement like that, you're going to offend everybody under the age of 30.
Well, that's okay. There are some exceptions among my audience, but most are over 30.
Right.
And the ones who are under 30 probably won't be offended, I hope.
And there are young people playing pretty good traditional music too, if you can find that.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter, who's interested in old music because I kind of brainwashed her with these little kids to like old music by playing 78s for her when she was 3, 4, 5 years old.
Uh-huh.
So she found, when she was in America, she found kind of a subculture of kids playing old music, and it's not like the folknik thing of the 60s when I was young, which I didn't like at all. Like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, I didn't like that stuff. Even then I liked the real old stuff. But the kids doing it now are sound much more authentic, even though it's 40 years later even than it was then. It sounds more like the really old stuff of the 20s than the stuff that the kids were doing when I was young. It's interesting. I don't know where they get it. I've asked a couple of them, these kids in their 20s, and they get it off of CD reissues, but they do it. It sounds like the real thing because some of them actually come from down and out places, and they've learned that music, and they've bypassed everything in between the 20s and now, going back and playing banjos and fiddles and singing old time songs. And nice to see.
When you describe that as authentic music, and I absolutely agree, it is authentic music.
Yeah.
What is it that makes it so authentic? Why do we react that way to it?
Well, it's almost exactly parallel to eating tomatoes or corn out of the garden, or buying them at the supermarket, or a hamburger made with real hamburger and compared to a McDonald's hamburger. It's just it's just more genuine. It comes more straight out of some kind of people's culture that grew naturally over a long period of time, over generations, and changed and altered over time, and corrupted by outside influences and all that, but not nearly to the extent of the fake, contrived, artificially flavored music of modern times. And even if you have young kids who are sincere about being musicians as much as they can, most of them have only heard this stuff that's already so thin and fake that then what they do, their takeoff, and that is yet thinner and even more fake. It's really hard for them to get back to anything real. They're so far removed from it, which is very depressing, actually. And to me, the destruction of popular or people's music culture, folk music culture, whatever you want to call it, vernacular music, the destruction of that, the loss of that is just as great as the loss of forests and clean water or anything. It's part of the human culture that's just been so bought and sold so many times. But I could go on for hours about this subject.
Is that true for popular culture in France? I mean, you have
pretty much. They have some of the most horrible popular music here. It just makes your blood curdle.
Uh-huh.
Different from the American thing. It's a different kind of fake. It's really, but here, if you go to local villages and regions that are fairly far from big urban centers, like in the Auvergne in the center of France, you can still find these little bands that are playing old time waltz music or bourrée music and accordions and instruments like that, and singing old time songs. That's still pretty close to the original because the rural farm culture there is still fairly intact. It's not as destroyed as it is in America. A lot largely has to do with how much is left of real, genuine rural culture, where supplies the lifeblood of any kind of ongoing vernacular music.
My first overseas tour as a Foreign Service officer was in Marseille, and I used to go out on the weekends doing representation, and would go to a lot of these small villages that would have ceremonies of one kind or another, and they would need to have an American presence of some kind. And so these invitations would get kicked down, and the smallest, furthest, most unimportant villages would get kicked to me. But that was fun because then you could go way out.
What period are you talking about here?
That was in the late 80s. And so I think...
Did you hear interesting music at these ceremonies? Did they have music?
Well, I think the most interesting one I went to was a wine festival where they were speaking in, if I remember correctly, in Catalan, which or in one of those southern languages that's now basically lost?
That would probably be Occitan in Languedoc. This is Languedoc, the land of the Occitan language.
I think that's right.
Pretty much died out. There's very few people actually can converse in that language anymore.
Yeah, it's marvelous though in the south of France. I envy you. I can't say, and
it's really changed a lot since you were here. It's changed a lot since the '80s. It's updated and modernized a lot, but it's still really nice. It is a really nice place to live. But that's a secret. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah, well, the worst part of the year though was in August when everybody would come down from Paris, and
yeah, that's right. And Paris would empty out. And they all come down here in August.
Yeah.
Right. The roads are choked with cars, and they have all these stupid little campsites where they go to. All the Dutch and Belgians and English and Germans. They all come down here.
Okay, well, now let me switch gears a little bit from music, which I'm ignorant
let's get
of.
Off that subject. I could go on all night about that.
Well, I'd love to listen to you, but I'm just so ignorant that it's hard for me to think of the intelligent, useful things to
listen to music. I strongly urge you to dig out old-time music of the 20s, country music and blues. You can start with that, and then move on to jazz, and then even other forms like Greek music from that period is so fabulous. Or, I don't know, pick out any ethnic group. The Caribbean music recorded in those days is wonderful. Puerto Rican and Cuban and West Indian and all that. It's wonderful. It's fabulous music.
There's one
goldmine
record label that I like, Maple Shade Studios. It's a guy who was a designer of the A-10 and the F-16 who went off to do music recording in Maryland.
Designer of the what?
A couple of U.S. warplanes.
I wouldn't know.
He's
the A-10 and the F-16? I thought one of those guitars?
No. But he's a kind of an unusual genius type of person, and he's got. If you're not familiar with it, I'll send you some material about it. It's music that you might actually find interesting.
But if you look up on the internet, look up Yazoo Records.
Okay.
They do a lot of fabulous reissues, or Counties, another one. Those two I know in America are really good. There's another new one now by some guy in the South who's putting out a lot of old stuff too. I can't remember the name of offhand. He's just started recently. Look those up. It's a gold mine.
Well, I will take your advice and
music in your life, George.
Yeah, you're right.
You like classical music?
Well, I sort of do. I used to go in Chicago to the afternoon matinees to hear George Schulte and the Chicago Symphony.
Yeah. It's funny about it because on the radio or in general, like people's musical culture in America and what they know and what they're aware of or even hear now goes from like classical music, which is 17th, 18th, 19th, and early 20th century mostly. Unless you like John Cage and that sort of nonsense, then it jumps what people hear or what they're exposed to stuff from the last 40 years, from the 60s up to the present, and maybe might dip into the 50s a little bit, Elvis Presley, Hank Williams, etc. But then you go back before the war, it's just like you might as well be playing music from China or something, and people just don't know about it. It's really funny that way. It goes from classical music and this big gap, that earlier period, which it's if classical music doesn't sound antique to people, why would this country music of the 20s sound so exotic and strange and antique to them? But it does. I think it's because that kind of folk music it's so much of its time and place, whereas classical music somehow it's written and it's performed by armies of highly trained musicians for originally aristocratic audiences. It's a completely different thing.
That's an interesting observation. It sort of would suggest, I don't know, maybe thinking about it, that there was some really big cultural change around that time. So we've got collective amnesia about that may account for that discontinuity. I don't know.
Yeah, because the old music that I like was people's music. It was popular music of the common people. and the common people's tastes and attitudes have changed so much that the older music just sounds strange. It just sounds exotic. But to me, I don't know, it's like going back and talking to your grandparents about what it was like in the old days, or eating a good home-cooked meal made by your grandmother. It's just so real and comfortable and genuine to me. I don't know. Maybe sometimes I think it's just neurological. Some people are just neurologically inclined that way, and others aren't. To like old stuff and not like modern things. I don't know.
And there may be even some inherited memories. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Actually, you're right.
Okay, let me ask you another stupid question.
And I'll give you a stupid answer.
I read a number of questions that have been posed to you in interviews, including one that you did with Steve Bell about what kinds of pens you use and nibs and et cetera.
Forget all that. That doesn't interest anybody outside of like other cartoonists. I use the Hunts 102 Crow Quill.
No. And I'm not an artist, so I can't make sense of that at all. But I was wondering, have you ever fiddled around with an Etch-a-Sketch?
Yeah, I never got anywhere with Etch-a-Sketch. But my daughter, on the other hand, I have downstairs, in fact, Etch-a-Sketch machine sitting on the mantle with this like masterpiece that my daughter made on an Etch-a-Sketch. I don't know how she did it. I can never figure it out. How to make a coherent drawing of those things.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think visually?
Do I think visually?
Yeah.
You know what? I don't think I do that much, actually. I don't think I do. Either that or I burned out my, inner eye with too much LSD. I'm not sure, but I don't think I'm particularly have an inner visual eye. I don't think so, actually. I don't think that's what my drawing skill is about. I don't think that's what it comes from, or even my, people say I must have great powers of observation. I don't think I'm any more observant visually than most people. I just think maybe I'm more like culturally attuned. So, for instance, if I'm walking in the woods, I can't tell one tree from another. I walk with some friend of mine who can identify what every plant is, or even the rock strata. I don't know that, but in the city, I can tell you like what era a building is from, or how obviously this street has changed. I'm very attuned to that just because it's a cultural thing. I'm interested in that culturally. Or the way people dress. I'm very interested in the evolution of people's clothing and styles and all that. It's just like a sociological fascination more than it is powers of observation. I actually have tested my powers of observation and realized they're actually quite weak. You can think of a label from a product that's very familiar to you.
Campbell's soup can, or okay.
Yeah, and then actually close your eyes and try and actually visualize it clearly. I realized some of them I could, and others, oh my God, what does it look like now? This, the Heinz ketchup label, or something real familiar like that. Wait a minute, I kind of know sort of vaguely what it looks like, but getting a clear picture of something I've seen thousands of times. I did this test with record labels that I was really familiar with from old 78s, and I did very poorly on it.
That's interesting. Do you ever dream in cartoons?
No, never dream in cartoons.
Never?
No. When I took LSD in the 60s, I had LSD visions in cartoons, and it got completely out of control where I couldn't stop it. And that's where a lot of my whole kind of like cartoon vision came from this thing that started on LSD and became this nightmare that I couldn't stop, a waking nightmare that I couldn't control, of everything in my head, just these kind of harsh, electric, grotesque, like 1940s cartoon images, just constantly running in my head. And I just had to draw it. I was forced to draw it on paper because it was just in my head. It was there. But naturally and generally, I don't dream in cartoons, no.
And I know you've not used drugs for many, many years. When I was between the ages of 13 and about 16, I used a lot of drugs too, including
13 and 16?
Yeah, I was precocious.
Oh shit, Jesus.
And including a lot of LSD.
Wow, because at that age, you're so young, your mind is still developing. That's, ooh,
I know.
wow.
But so when you talk about using LSD, I mean, I know something of what you're talking about, sort
Yeah.
of, this membrane of reality that shifts, and
Yeah, that's right. Membrane of reality. Good. It's good. I started when I was 22. I just took it till I was about 30, and then I stopped altogether. The last time I took it, a voice said very loudly, "Why are you still doing this?"
yeah,
I'm on all fours on the ground, vomiting, and I said, "Why do you keep doing this to yourself?"
yeah.
So I never did it again after that.
On balance, you've said that it was probably helpful to you, but it's dangerous, and I think that's
Yeah.
probably a good summary.
Yeah, it is. At the time, wasn't aware that. I mean, people were saying it was dangerous. A lot of like older people, but we didn't believe them. We just believed Timothy Leary.
Right.
But yeah, I think it had. Nobody has done. They don't do any studies. Nobody's seriously studied the effects since it was made illegal. They don't
Right.
serious research on the effects of it. So it's hard to separate. But I really think it impaired me in certain ways to cope with the world for many, many years after I stopped taking it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it scrambled some things in my brain, although it also gave me visions and all that, and really put my artwork into a whole other level that did not exist in it before.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, getting along in the world, it was, kind of, not helpful in that regard.
Well, now that you're getting older and you sort of introduce these themes in towards the end of the handbook, you're interested more in spiritual questions than you were.
Yeah, well, I was always interested in spiritual questions, but it's only since maybe the past dozen years that I got disciplined about it at all. I've always just played with it before. I was interested, but to really get into that in a serious way, you got to be disciplined on a regular basis, practice something on a regular basis. So I do meditation every day.
Wow.
I try not to miss a day. I do 45 minutes a day, and sometimes more if I can. And I fooled around with all in the last dozen years or so with different kinds of interesting mental exercises, and I did recapitulation. I got that out of Castaneda, where you actually basically review your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried out of body experience. I kind of achieved that, but only for very brief periods. And then my life I got so hectic. I realized this just takes so much time and focus. I couldn't pursue it, and stuff like that. It's all very interesting, and I absolutely know and believe that we have powers beyond what we understand, or we have potentials that we just have barely touched.
And what do you think of the possibility of sort of other forms of life out there? I don't know, aliens or angels.
I'm very much interested in all that. I'm very interested in UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, all those things. All of it. I've read all kinds of books, and I read Fate magazine. It's a great little magazine about that kind of stuff. Fortean phenomena and all that. I'm very interested in all that. I don't see any reason why we should be the only intelligent species in the universe. In fact, it's pretty likely that there are intelligences that are hugely advanced beyond us, and that we could very well just be something that they created. We don't know.
Right.
And, we could gradually, eventually start to discover that stuff and come to it slowly. And 500 years from now, look back on what we knew or what we thought we knew. And this time is about the same as we look back on the people of the Middle Ages, and what they thought that, the Catholic Church and demons in the air and all that stuff. I'm sure that we'll look back on this time that way if we make it.
Yeah. If
screw ourselves out of the whole deal.
I would guess that assuming that there's some kind of higher intelligence and much longer lived intelligence, that that probably those beings would think in graphical terms. I don't know.
Who knows how they think, or what they think, or who they are, or what dimension they exist on, or whether we're just like part of them, or what. We don't know. We have no idea. Well, let me ask you something, George.
Yeah.
Have you yourself ever personally had a paranormal experience which was so vivid and convincing that you could tell pretty much without a doubt that there was something beyond the normally known world?
Yeah. In fact, let me tell you about it.
Yeah.
Again, when I was a teenager, I was absolutely obsessed with the idea of trying to figure out the sort of the cosmological structure of spiritual connections to physical reality. I hadn't quite thought about it.
When you were a teenager, you were doing this?
Yeah.
Was this in connection with taking LSD and things?
No, it was after I'd quit doing drugs. But I was really quite, I don't know, I thought that by a lot of meditation that I could, and a lot of mental work, that I could kind of find this pathway to a higher plane of existence.
Mm-hmm, yeah. I tend to believe that that's possible with a lot of work, but maybe when you're that age, I don't know.
And so I was, trying to figure it out. And then one day, I'd come out of the shower and I'd gone into my room and I thought, okay, George, let's put this to the test. And so I did this sort of mental gymnastics where you hold, it's like holding a dimension and then going through it and then holding the next dimension open. And it's like a ladder almost.
Did you get this out of a book or something? Or
No.
Did you make this up?
All figured out from somewhere inside.
Yeah.
And so then I went up these steps, and I don't know what it is, 13 steps or what. I can't remember now, to be honest. And I got to the top, and I pushed through into the place where I thought would be this other plane of enlightenment. And I kind of expected there to be something there, but what there was a color. And where I pushed through was a color of, and I can only say a color unlike, it was green. It was a green color, but it had infinite depth to it, and it had luminosity. It was a pure color, and it was surrounded by a pure radiance, also of infinite depth. And so I held this construct in my mind for maybe a couple of seconds, let it go. The vision disappeared, and my first thought was, oh my God, this is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. How am I going to remember it?
Yeah.
Well, I've remembered it, but kind of, it was like, okay, that was the big experience that I had when I was a kid. But there's no question that there is something there that people do experience. I used to talk about this occasionally, and I'll tell you another little story about it because I think you'll find this one interesting.
You have to be careful who you talk to about this stuff, because some people will scoff at it, and that can have a very negative effect on you. And so they do kind of be careful who you. I don't talk to everybody about it, because some people just kind of make you feel stupid about it or something.
When I was again a graduate student, I was helping to take care of this guy Arnaldo Momigliano, who was a very great historian, Italian Jew. And he was a visiting scholar every year at Chicago, and he was the friend of a friend of mine, and he had a heart attack, so I was helping to kind of babysit him. And as we were talking about religion, he was telling me about the history of my family's religion, Presbyterians. And so I thought, well, in the context of all this, I would tell him the story. And he said, oh yeah, I know about that. And he said, there are groups of Jewish mystics that get together. And you'll have some of them, they'll try to do this all together, and some of them will get there and some of them won't. And of those who get there, some of them will make it into a big religious thing, and some of them will think, aha, well, that's just what it is, and it doesn't have a religious impact on them.
Yeah.
So I said, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's a sort of thing I think probably a lot of groups, a lot of different religions, and a lot of different people in different ways kind of discover, and how they discover it I don't know, but
on the other hand, organized religions to me are almost all bad.
Yeah.
Maybe probably the best one is Buddhism.
Yeah. Well,
Hinduism,
yeah.
Has some problems, but also has some deep stuff.
Yeah.
The three Western religions to me are quite negative. You can find rare individuals who make something positive out of Christianity or Judaism or even Islam, but in general, I think that they tend to be used to manipulate to keep people down in some kind of ignorance. Even though that at the core of them, all of them had a core of some, great ideas like Christianity. Some of the words of Christ, as you read them in the New Testament, are really wonderful things, but what they've made out of Christianity is awful, just plain god awful. I was raised Catholic, and oh boy, it was bad.
I'm very conflicted about that because on the one hand, I agree I don't like organized religion for myself personally, and I don't even consider myself a Christian. But on the other hand, it's clear that the religion provides enormous support for people and a sense of community. And
well, as my friend Spain says, no army ever went to war in the name of Satan. Know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, your project for the next or for the last couple of years, ironically, is
illustrated Genesis. Yeah.
Well, so what is the tone that you're taking with that then?
A totally straight illustration. I'm illustrating every word of it totally seriously, and I'm not making fun of it. I'm not making any jabs or digs in there at all. I'm just making a straight illustration of it. Because my purpose, as I realized, I wasn't quite sure at first, but I've realized as I was doing it that my purpose is to illuminate the text, to show what the text is really about as much as is possible by illustrating every word of it in a comic book form, in comic strip. And that's been very interesting.
There all the famous stories are in Genesis, and there are plenty of famous pictures of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark, and all that.
Yeah.
But I was trying to think of the creation, and the only picture that I could come up with, and I'm not literate in art history either, but still, it was Blake's The Ancient of Days.
Mm-hmm.
But art, am I right in thinking that perhaps there are very few artistic representations of the creation itself?
There are some, and you have to read it very, very closely. And also, it's really good to read a lot of other background material. Like, for instance, it's very helpful to have studied what's already been translated. It's not all been translated, and some of it's only been crudely translated. The ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts from cuneiform.
Mm-hmm.
I've read lots of those books, and how their concepts of the creation and the cosmos and all that, and the early Hebrew stories are very much tied in with those, with that early Mesopotamian civilization. You get the whole Adam and Eve thing is in the Hebrew text is a kind of a simplified version of stories from Sumeria and Akkadian and Babylonia. It's very interesting, all that, to me. That whole thing's interesting. And you can tell if you read closely the concept in the very first part of the creation.
Yeah.
Where it says that God says, let there be light and all that. And they says, and God said, let there be a vault in the midst of the waters, and let it divide water from water. And God made the vault, and it divided the water beneath the vault from the water above the vault. And these ancient people literally thought that the heavens and the sea were just, there was a hollow hole in the midst of this like solid mass of infinite water. You suddenly realize, oh yeah, they would look out at the sea and see it meet the sky. And think, oh, it's just like the sky, just a big like mass of water, and we're just living in a hollow vault in the middle of it. But you have to read very closely to realize that by water they mean water. They don't mean anything else. I mean, people try to say that it's not really about water; it's about something else. So my point is that you have to read the stuff very closer to and have it in historic context to even to be able to illustrate it properly.
That's like the Flammarion woodcut, where finding a place where the earth and the sky meet, I guess.
Yeah, and I think they probably saw it as like, if you got to the end of the sea, it would just like curve up, and you'd, there's like a big vault, a seamless backdrop, that goes up, and then God put the stars and the moon and the sun in the sky, and in the vault. They're not embedded in the water; they're hanging, dangling, suspended in the vault. And somehow, there's night and day and all. They didn't understand anything about the Earth revolving around the sun or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But they did track the stars. They did track them, but I don't know whether they thought they came out of the sea and went to bed in the sea or what. I don't know.
That's interesting. It makes me think of C.S. Lewis's description of some of that stuff in Narnia with the floods and water. And I forget which book it is.
I never read that.
I was just looking at this afternoon, and I realized that there's two stories of Adam and Eve.
There's two creation stories. Yep, one follows the other, and they contradict each other.
Yeah. In one of them, you eat the fruit and you die, and the other one, you eat it and you get exiled.
Well, what I think is that first, in the first one, I forget which one comes first. It's the 7 days. Does that one come first? Yeah, and then the order of creation is different than in the second creation story. He creates man first and then gives him the animals. The first creation story, the animals are created first and then man.
Mm-hmm.
So, the editor at the publisher that I'm doing this for, when I sent him the first few pages of my comic, he said, "Well, this creation story doesn't make sense. It contradicts itself. Can't you redraw it so that it all makes, that it all fits together in more like logical sequence?" I said, "That's the way it was written." He said, "That's the way it was written?
Nobody knows that.
You didn't do that?" I said, "No, I'm just literally writing what's in the text and illustrating it. I'm not changing anything or altering it to make it, more entertaining for modern readers. Although I think in comic form it makes it more readable for modern people. It was not written originally as entertainment. It's not what it was. That maybe when they were sitting around the campfire telling the stories before it was written, they probably did it somewhat as entertainment, but it was also like the litany of the generations and all that, which they still do in Bedouin tents in the Sahara Desert.
Does the tree of life reappear very very much in that? You have
Tree of life?
Yeah.
I've got a great big drawing of the tree of life. I did, but there's two trees.
The tree of knowledge and the tree of life.
Knowledge and the tree of life. And after they eat the apple from the tree of knowledge, God says, "Now that man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, he may reach out and take as well from the tree of life and live forever."
Don't want that.
One of us? Who's he talking about?
I don't know. It's very curious.
And how do they know what God's thinking? Who told them what God was thinking? But there it is anyway.
Well, did you immerse yourself in religious scholarship to try to...
I did, yeah. And in religious scholarship, you've got to separate the stuff that's disinterested from the stuff that's trying to, looking for, great, messages from God in the text. The people who revere the text and think it's the Word of God, that a lot of that scholarship is really not very helpful.
Right.
Because I don't revere the text, I don't think it's the Word of God. I think it's very much the words of men. I don't understand how anybody can possibly think it's the Word of God. I mean, who tells them it's the Word of God? God didn't tell them. Some person told them it was the Word of God. I don't get it.
Well, I guess that was the notion that people had up until, I don't know, several decades ago, that this was all handed down to Moses and he wrote it all down. So it was literally coming from one source, or maybe more than decades. But anyway, the idea that it came from Moses.
The first 5 books, the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible. Moses wrote them or something.
Right. One of the things that you did related to religion that I thought was fascinating was drawing the religious experience of Philip K. Dick.
Oh, yeah. Huh. Yeah, that was interesting. He was a crazy guy. It's hard to say about those kind of visions, like at a guy like Philip K. Dick had, how much of it was induced by like cross neurons because of all the crazy drugs he was taking, or what. I don't know. What was interesting, his vision was very interesting. Suddenly he's catapulted back to Roman times, and he's a secret Christian, and he has to make secret hand signals to other Christians because the Romans are watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, that to me was much more interesting than his actual science fiction writing. That story of his religious experience.
Did you ever talk to him, or?
No, I just read about that in an odd magazine of that period called Gnosis.
Did you ever hear from him about it? Was he?
No, I think he might have died actually by the time I wrote it. By the time I did that story, he might have already been dead. I'm not sure. When did he die? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. No.
That story in 85, something like that, 86.
He died when he was in his 50s.
Yeah, he died young. Yeah. He's fairly young. Anyway, I'm really interested in spiritual quest, but I think that organized religion is a thing that, because the spiritual quest is such an important part of human life, like a lot of other chicanery and frauds in the world, if something's important to people, some guys will figure out how to stand between you and that thing and make a living off of it and keep you in abject subjugation because this thing's important to you and you need it. That's what the Catholic priest is. He's a guy that is literally the mediator between you and God. You have to go to him, and then he goes to God, and that's how you're absolved of your sins.
Well, that actually gets to a question I was thinking about as I was taking my dog and walking around in the park this afternoon, and that is how we understand the power of visual memes and how they spread, or as you were just saying, how they're controlled.
Visual memes?
Memes.
Visual memes, like what? Like visual imagery.
Okay, take the "Keep on Truckin'" meme. I mean, that's just that became a symbol of a whole era practically.
Yeah, it really surprised the hell out of me when that caught on. I had no intention, no anticipation of that happening. It completely caught me, and I was very young, and the whole thing got completely away from me.
But you must have thought about it then afterwards. Why was it that resonated?
Yeah, I did. I have no idea. No idea why that caught the public mind. Who knows about such things,
Here's the gap. Okay, well let's pick up from the greeting cards. When you were, or I guess not doing greeting cards, but you were later at Help magazine.
That was yeah.
And one of your colleagues was Terry Gilliam?
Yeah, he worked as the assistant to the editor, Harvey Kurtzman, who was my mentor. He was the guy that I really looked up to. Mm-hmm. He is Harvey Kurtzman.
I was wondering, do you still keep up with Terry Gilliam?
No, I haven't seen him for a long time. I haven't seen him since, I don't know, the early 1990s. I used to run into him periodically here and there. It was weird.
Because I was wondering what you think of movies that he's done, like Brazil.
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought Brazil was great.
I
thought he did some really good stuff, He went off to England just after he quit Help magazine. Mm-hmm. And actually, I got his job as the assistant editor after he left. I was back in Cleveland working at the greeting card company again, and Kurtzman notified me and said, "Do you want Terry Gilliam's job?" I said, "Wow, yeah." He also had Gloria Steinem working for him at Help magazine for a while. Interesting. There's a lot of people apprenticed with Kurtzman. He started Mad magazine. He was a great cartoon satirist of the 50s. And he ended up doing Little Annie Fanny for Playboy.
Oh, that was a great cartoon.
It was okay. It was not his best stuff because Hefner interfered in it too much. I can get really angry at Hef when I think about how he messed with Kurtzman's stuff, and Kurtzman became very dependent on him because he had to make a living, he had a family to support and all that, and his magazines failed, so he ended up.
If I remember, and I hate to even admit that I do remember some of this, but the later Annie Fannies were not as good as the earlier ones.
that could be. I kind of gave up on it. It was beautifully drawn. I mean, they worked so hard on the artwork. It was beautiful, but the content was just formulaic because of Hefner's interference in it. I used to go visit Kurtzman, and he was in Mount Vernon, New York, when I was working there in New York, and he would just show me these overlays that Kurtzman would put over his Annie Fanny roughs, with this blue penciling, because Hef was a frustrated cartoonist himself, and Kurtzman was just weeping with vexation over this.
Oh, no.
It just destroyed him. It was really sad to see. But when he offered me this assistant editor job at Help, I jumped at it. And I quit the job in Cleveland and American Greetings, and I went to New York with my wife, got an apartment, and reported for work on Monday morning at Help Magazine, raring to go. And there's Kurtzman leaning against the wall outside the office, and the guys are carrying out the furniture.
Oh, no.
And I said, what's going on? He said, the publisher folded the magazine. Sorry, it's over.
Wow.
Yeah. His satire was just too out there. It was too uncommercial for that period. He just couldn't make it independently, so he had to depend completely on Playboy, and it really demoralized him. And I watched that happen to him, and I resolved I never would let that happen to me. I'd never subject my talents and skills to somebody like that. And then the whole hippie thing happened, and underground comics and all that, and I had total independence and freedom. So it didn't make much money for the first 2 or 3 decades, but I'm doing okay now.
And then you were amazingly strict with yourself about not selling out, because a lot of artists did, and they're all gone. You're the only one left.
There's plenty of artists who didn't sell out. You just don't hear about them. They're still out there working, lots of them. But doing comics is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, a lot of labor. You have to really love it. Love what you're doing, because you're not going to get rich doing it. Unless you're doing Peanuts or Doonesbury or something. Or the Avengers. Otherwise, even the guys that do the Avengers, they're just laborers. They don't make much money. The comic books, there's not much money in it, but I done well. I did, because my stuff somehow caught the public imagination. I don't know, so I do okay.
Well, and now you're becoming accepted in the world of fine art, and museums are showing your work.
Yeah, what the hell is that about? I don't have a clue. I couldn't begin to tell you what that's about. Why they're on to me? It's completely weird. But the books that I do, the books that kind of don't sell in large numbers, and somehow I'm kind of well known from that movie and everything, a documentary and all that. But my books, they don't sell in 10, 20,000. That's about it. Mostly the handbook did better, because the publisher of that book just promoted it like crazy. They just went all out for the promotion. So that probably sold about 50,000. But I'm no Stephen King or anything.
Is the handbook out of print now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's out of print.
I should have taken Aileen's advice and bought 3. I only have the 1 copy.
Why the fine art world got interested in me, I don't have a clue. But it's nice, because the original art then sells for a lot of money. Although I don't even have that much original art left. I got rid of it all years ago. Gave it away.
Cheap. Robert Hughes, who's a fan and a friend of yours and a prominent art critic, says you're the one and only genius that the 1960s produced, a weird counterpart to Disney.
He did say that. That was nice of him to say that. I don't know. I mean, there was John Lennon and Bob Dylan and some other people like that. There's some other really good cartoonists who are unsung, and then a few authors of that period that are great. Charles Bukowski, I really like him a lot, or guys like that. I don't know. What's kind of like insulting for me is when somebody does a big book about the 60s and I'm not in it. That's what me.
Well, one of my regular listeners who I correspond with sent me an email this morning talking about your work, and he said that you are, quote, a fearless self-examiner who nailed his own psyche so dead center that he managed to nail America's in the process.
That's nice. I like that.
But that sort of rings true. I mean, it's a lot of the art. It's about honesty, right?
Well, yeah, I guess it is. I don't know whether it's a kind of exhibitionism, like a guy who opens his coat and shows his dick to the world, or some of it's just that, a kind of compulsive exhibitionism. Here, love me for all my warts and ugliness, and love me anyway. Testing their love. I don't know. It's kind of megalomaniacal in a way. And I think I'm also kind of autistic. I'm kind of cut off from normal human social interaction. So that was my way of connecting to the world. When I was young, I really lived my youth on paper. I was hid behind my drawing. I didn't relate very well to other human beings. I was afraid of people in the world when I was young. I'm not the bravest guy now either, but I'm not that kind of compulsive drawer like I used to be.
Well, to me, you sound very reasonable and normal, to be honest.
It's been hard work. It's been hard work constructing that personality. As Temple Grandin says in her book, who she is, this autistic woman who wrote this book about herself, Temple Grandin. She says, what you're reading right now is a complete construct. This is my personality that's consciously constructed to imitate a normal human being's personality. I feel kind of like that, except it took me, many, many years. When I was young, I was quite catatonic.
Well, what do you enjoy in terms of art now? And you've written that you like painting. You like drawing with your wife.
Yeah, I like doing these New Yorker strips with my wife. We just finished one, in fact.
Uh-huh.
And this is a whole new thing because this one includes my daughter's artwork also.
Oh, cool.
So it's like me and Aileen and Sophie did a comic strip together, which is probably a first in the history of the world, if you think about it. I'm sure you're not going to find, I defy you to find another comic strip by a husband and wife and their offsprings anywhere in the world.
And so each of them are drawing their own character?
Yeah, they draw themselves and write their own dialogue, and we kind of pass it back and forth, and and kind of the whole thing kind of writes itself.
Wow.
Yeah. And my daughter, she's, her part of it, I looked at it, I said, wow, it's strong, and she's got a very vigorous vision, very strong, and I almost feel, Aileen and I felt almost just get out of the way and let the younger generation have their say, She's so vigorous and strong, and she was even saying, Dad, your caricatures, they're not, caricatured enough. And then she showed me how I should have caricatured myself, and it was so much better than my own caricature of myself.
Well, there's something I don't know about your art that is just enormously powerful. I have to say, just the thought of it. I think absolutely.
Tell me more.
Well,
talking, I'm liking this. I like hearing that. I can't tell. I mean, I look at artists who I admire, who I think are powerful, and I hold my own stuff up next to theirs, and it looks, weak and insipid and bland compared to, Thomas Nast or James Gilray or those guys from the 50s that did the EC comics. God, I say, how did they do that? They were on their 20s when they did that stuff. This EC artists of the 50s, that did Tales from the Crypt and, all those comics that eventually became Mad magazine.
Well, Nast at least was much more formal.
Look at his cross-hatching is just so powerful, and his caricatures he captures his epics so beautifully. The political content is kind of irrelevant, just the drawing, the is so strong.
When you were talking to Steve Bell, he asked you why you didn't do political cartoons, and you said you were leaving that to him, and he's a brilliant cartoonist.
Yeah.
But have you
I
thought?
can't do political cartoons. I can't do it. It always, if I tried for a while in the '80s, and it just came out stiff, and it didn't work. Failure. There was a local paper where I lived in California called Winds of Change that I worked for doing political cartoons, and it was such a thankless job. It's kind of a left-wing paper, and
Yeah.
and I don't know if ever worked with left-wing political types that much, and they just they take an artist, they just want you to be their hand, and if you have your own ideas, they're never happy. There's just constantly nitpicking the work apart, and there was no appreciation, nothing. It was thankless, and I don't think the cartoons I did had any effect on anything. And now I look at them, they just look forced, and I didn't make it work as a political artist.
And they didn't pay you, and then they sold the originals and made money, etc.
Exactly, yeah. Precisely. And the endless fucking meetings and all that. I did this one comic story but the only thing to do with those meetings to keep myself from falling asleep was to play footsie with the girl sitting across the table. Beautiful young girl shooting off her mouth about what we should be doing, and when it came time to actually do anything, none of those people were there to actually do the dirty work. Well, one quiet guy who never said anything.
Otherwise preoccupied. Well, Robert, but in those days, you were for a kind of a revolution, or you were thinking about it, and you say not now because your fear of social disorder and sort of we're all so screwed up that whatever we would do to change things would make things worse. But don't you wonder though? I mean, things are so bad now that if we don't fix what we're doing, we're looking at planet-wide destruction and catastrophe that'll take hundreds of thousands of years to recover from. And I mean, how do you balance those risks now?
Well, you can't force it, though. That doesn't seem to ever work. Forcing it, does that ever work? Did the Russian Revolution work? Did the French Revolution work? I mean, they changed things, but was it for the better? I don't know. I just don't know. I can't answer that one.
Okay.
That's a big one. I spent a lot of time anguishing over that when I was younger.
Yeah.
And all the people that were pushing for the revolution when I was young.
Yeah.
And we all in 1970 we believed that the revolution was imminent.
Just around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But what if Abby Hoffman had gotten in power, or Eldridge Cleaver, or any of those guys?
Yeah.
Whoa, Nelly. Boy, there would be concentration camps. They had big egos. They're ready to start locking people up and create their own forces of order, and according to the world according to Abby Hoffman, or any of them.
So, well, what do people like me do who still worry about it?
Keep worrying. The more people worry about it, the better.
Yeah.
I don't know how you come up against the chicanery and the blackness in the hearts of men. I don't know.
I think a lot of it goes back actually to what you were saying about music, that it's local, that you have to go back to a much more local way of doing things.
Yeah. That's one thing that seems to sometimes work. People start doing something locally positive. In America, that seems to be one of the more hopeful things. That once in a while you read about some people that are doing something positive locally. But the juggernaut, the ongoing, techno business juggernaut, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to deal with that, how we're going to get that in line. But, humans are very adaptable, and they'll go through periods of horrible suffering and death and bloodshed and change. I mean, that if you compare how, the average person in the West thinks now to how they thought 100 years ago, I mean, there have been some advances. Haven't there? I don't know.
I think so. One thing that I keep asking myself is, how do you explain how bad things are to people who are deeply vested in convincing themselves that things are good, or that they should be doing the things that they're told to do, etc. Now there are some people.
How do you? That's a very good question. Got any answers?
Well, I figured out, I think, that there's a very large group of people that aren't going to listen no matter what.
Yeah.
But then there's still a large group of people that are at least intellectually approachable and willing to have rational conversations. And so,
right.
And then those are the ones really to worry about and to try to
reach.
Try to reach, yeah.
Yeah, but then as you're saying about communication, how do you communicate to the broad masses of people complex ideas that kind of are not that fun to think about or pleasant and aren't going to benefit them economically in the short run at all? You look at the paper; it's sort of discouraging. Like I don't like to look at daily papers. I rarely ever do, but I glanced at some article in the polls about this election coming up in America, and how now, because of the gas prices, that's like the big issue in most people's mind. It's the main issue is the stupid gas prices.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do? How can you deal with that mentality? It's just like whatever is affecting me right at this moment and hurting my pocketbook right at this moment is the only thing I'm concerned about, and I just want somebody to fix that for me. So, right now, fix that. You, Obama, or you, McCain, fix that. Fix the gas prices for me. If who's ever got the slickest line about how we're going to fix the gas prices wins, even if they're lying. A lie usually goes over better than the truth. A good, well-told lie is much easier to put across than the difficult, tedious, complicated truth of things.
In normal times, that's probably true, but I wonder whether
people get scared enough.
Yeah,
that will affect their minds. If Al Gore can scare enough people about global warming, and it seems to be having some effect. I mean, I saw this TV ad when I was in the States recently.
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to, where did we see that? We were turning on the TV somewhere, and whoa, here's this guy from Texas. He used to be this oil man.
T. Boone Pickens, sure.
Yeah, talking about all these new ways of creating energy. I was really amazed at that.
Those are very powerful ads.
Yeah, they are. They were very. I thought, wow, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
So, that there's always some hopeful signs out there in the midst of all the bleak horror that's going on.
Of course, he's all busy buying up water aquifers too, in the expectation we're going to run out of water, and so shifted from oil to
Well, there you go.
He's the American way.
I don't know.
Robert, I've taken up a lot of your time, and I'm so grateful to you. I know that your time is very valuable. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about for a minute or two, or?
Well, I guess I don't know. I guess about that. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes. So I guess that's hearing enough of me.
Well, I think that people will be very happy to hear an hour and 20 minutes from you. Believe me.
But I'm sure you're gonna bridge it down to something reasonable.
No.
Why don't you can you send me a CD of it or anything?
Yeah. Okay. So Robert, let's wrap it up there, and thank you again very much for talking with me.
Sure. My pleasure.